Good evening, everybody. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. As we begin tonight, I want to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples, particularly those of the Coast Salish region. This includes the Duwamish, Suquamish, and Muckleshoot peoples, among others, who have lived in relationship with the land and waters of the Puget Sound since time immemorial. I'll also mention that the library resources are a great place to start if you're looking to learn more about colonization and its impact on Native peoples and their lands. Welcome to tonight's program, which is presented in partnership with Densho and our friend at Mums Books. I have a couple quick announcements before we get started. First, we're grateful to the Seattle Times for their generous support of library programs. Thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation, whose support helps the library provide free programs and services for everyone in our community. As I mentioned, we have assistive listening technology available on this table over here. If you find during the program that you need that and you didn't get one, you can just give me a little wave. I'll hang out on the side here and keep an eye out. You can give me a wave and I'll bring one to you. We are going to have an opportunity for Q&A at the close of the event, and we'll run mics so that everybody will be able to hear your questions. Any problem with the devices? It sounds like I'm in a tunnel. Okay, maybe I'll talk a little slower and maybe our AV folks can see if that will help. Finally, I wanted to mention that you received a survey when you came in. Please feel free to fill those out after the event and return them as you head out into the evening. Now I am delighted to just mention the start of this program. The Seattle Public Library is one of nearly 190 libraries on the West Coast that are celebrating One Book, One Coast this spring. The project is highlighting George Takei's graphic memoir, They Called Us Enemy. We've scheduled a number of programs in the next few months that will give you an opportunity to learn more about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and the various perspectives and feelings of those impacted. I'm so excited for tonight's program, and now please welcome Tom Ikeda, the founder of Densho, who will introduce the program more.
Whoops. So Stesha, thank you so much for that introduction. And I just want to acknowledge, Stesha, how much you do for the community and for doing this series and the Seattle Public Library. So can we have a applause for Stesha and what she does? Thank you. Yeah, I found out on Saturday that Stesha and our kids went to the same high school. I didn't realize that. So there's this connection, I feel. Tonight, when I was asked, well, before I even go to the introduction, just a little bit about me and why I'm doing this introduction. 30 years ago, I helped start an organization called Densho, which was to capture the stories about the World War II Japanese American incarceration. So for the last 30 years, I've been involved in the community and have been a keen observer of Japanese American history and a student of it. And so with that kind of background, I am just so deeply honored to be able to introduce the featured speaker tonight. And I'm going to explain why with three examples. When I think of Frank Abe, he's been this tremendous leader in bringing out the real, authentic voice of Japanese Americans, especially what happened during World War II. And some of you may think, well, so what's so big about that? But you have to realize, and this is from someone who's done hundreds of interviews with Japanese Americans, that this population had a very traumatic experience. And for them to actually speak out after that experience was very difficult. And Frank has been a leader in bringing this out. So the first example I'm going to talk about happened 48 years ago. It was the first, 1978. It's called the First Day of Remembrance. I think, and Frank, you should correct me if I'm wrong, but I always call this the largest gathering of Japanese Americans since World War II. So this is over 30 years after the war had ended, and you have this large gathering of Japanese Americans since the time they were prisoners in the camps. And what Frank and the other organizers of this event did was They brought the community together, and this was in Seattle, to actually speak out against the injustice of what they happened. And on a, kind of as a large demonstration, this was a watershed mark for the Japanese American community. It was also a key catalyst to what we call the redress movement, a movement to demand an apology from the government. So in 1978, Frank helped lead this demonstration, this event, the Day of Remembrance. And 10 years later, in 1988, President Reagan signed the 1988 Civil Liberties Act, which offered an apology and reparations to those Japanese Americans who were in camps. And in many ways, that early event, having Japanese Americans speak out, was so key to that. In 2000, just shortly after Reagan signed that the redress bill, Frank launched, or he premiered, the classic documentary called Conscience and the Constitution. And so this was, another, and I remember when this film came out, because it was very different than the other films I had seen about what happened to Japanese Americans. And what Frank focused on was, again, the voices of speaking out against what happened. And he focused on a large, organized, resistant movement that happened during World War II, the Heart Mountain Resistors. These were 85 men who defied the government's orders to be drafted while they were incarcerated to fight in the army. And it was at that point not a well-known story, and Frank brought this out. But the thing I loved about this, yes, it was a sort of a not well-known story, but what it also did was it sort of went against what many of the Japanese Americans were what I call the master narrative, and how they would talk about what happened to Japanese Americans, in that they were sort of victims, and they peacefully and willingly went along with this. And after the war, they sort of pulled up by their bootstraps and just sort of gum on or went on. Frank's film showed a different perspective, actually men and others who defied the government and resisted during the war. So that was another watershed event or product that talked about the voices of Japanese Americans in a more authentic way. And then more recently, it was his graphic novel that he co-authored, We Hereby Refuse. And again, by the title itself, you sort of hear, it's We Hereby Refuse. It's again, Japanese Americans who stood up to the government to fight this injustice that happened to the community. And a note about We Hereby Refuse. I haven't read very many graphic novels, but if you were to read one graphic novel, especially now when you think about what's happening in our country today, I would highly recommend We Hereby Refuse, because it's a powerful, more nuanced story about fighting against oppression and what happens in the moment and what you can do. So highly recommend it. So let me now turn to tonight's program, which is about his new book, The Literature of Japanese American Incarceration. And so I'm looking at you, Frank, because when I first read the title, it was like and for me at least, it was like a disconnect in terms of knowing Frank and the literature, the title, The Literature of Japanese American Incarceration. And let me explain. When I first read the title, I thought, well, people are going to think, well, maybe this is a compilation of what I would call kind of the biggest hits of Japanese American incarceration. Things like, you've probably heard, Farewell to Manzanar, or in the Seattle area, Nisei Daughter, or even No No Boy. I mean, or one of my favorites, When the Emperor Was Divine by Julie Otsuka. And I thought, well, so knowing Frank, I knew that was not, this was not going to be that book. It was going to be something else. And so in some ways, I'm being snarky about this. The literature of Japanese American incarceration, I don't know if it really captures the power of this book. And rather than me talking about it, let's please welcome Frank to the stage. And so a big round of applause for our featured speaker tonight, Frank Abe.
Thanks so much, Tom. That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I think that what you heard Tom describe about my background kind of prepares us for what we're going to talk about tonight after we discuss the book a little bit. But thank you, Tom. Thank you, Stacia. Thanks to the library, Seattle Times. Thanks to LA Public Library for this shared reading opportunity that encompasses 3 states. I'm talking tonight about the anthology, but to help illustrate my points, it also helps, as Tom mentioned, to share the panels from our graphic novel, We Hereby Refuse, published by Chin Music Press here in Pike Place Market. And I bring this up because this is a homegrown work to show that we can do graphic novels about camp alongside the featured Mr. Takei and the One Book, One Coast that is the umbrella for this discussion today. So ours is a local graphic novel, perhaps with a bit more of an edge than Mr. Takei's book. It's appropriate, though, the subject of One Book, One Coast is the subject for tonight because it was the forced removal of Japanese Americans from the West Coast, World War II. That was an experience that was shared by just this coast, just the West Coast, right? Because this is the coast that faces the Pacific Ocean, faces Japan after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So we were defined by our residents here in Seattle and Portland and San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's also a timely topic because, as Tom hinted at, we're seeing the government of today do what we saw it do in World War II with the targeting of immigrants for arrest and deportation and violation of the rights of American citizens. More on that later. Our purpose with the literature of incarceration is to present, and I appreciate this, Tom, that it's not just the greatest hits, not just the finest writing of camp, but it is the collective voice of a people defined by just this one moment in time, 4 years, World War II, during which the U.S. government expelled resident aliens and its own citizens from their homes, farms, and businesses, and imprisoned 125,000 of them in American concentration camps, based solely on the race that we shared with a wartime enemy. So this anthology reclaims and reframes the writing produced by those people, many voices telling a shared story. And the selections that we made favored writing, as Tom suggested, that is more pointed rather than poignant. And we present these writings chronologically so that readers can trace the continuum of events as the incarcerees themselves experienced it. So I asked my collaborator, Floyd Chung, a basic question when we started. How do we define literature? And he said, it can be any writing, including letters, memoirs, even song lyrics, not just the fine writing. And I said, great, because I've been collecting a lot of scraps over the years of things I thought were important, buying books and collecting papers from friends, scholars, with no real plan for how to use them. So this volume recovers pieces that have been long overlooked on the shelf, buried in the archives, or languished unread in the Japanese language. And in particular, the number of new translations from the Japanese language that we present, I think testifies to one of the long-term effects of camp, and that is the loss of language due to regulation and suppression, and the loss of culture due to the ongoing stigma of acknowledging any affinity to Japan. I mean, we wanted to be Japanese Americans, not Japanese from Japan. So we opened the volume with the earliest known Japanese American graphic narrative, The Four Immigrants manga by Henry Kiyama, written in Japanese to show the arrival of the Issei, first generation immigrants, as a means of showing the community that was lost and destroyed by the war, a burgeoning, growing, vibrant community destroyed by war. This was my grandparents' generation, and these are the grandparents who were the first to be arrested after Pearl Harbor under the Alien Enemies Act, new term we learned this year, which is the same law that was used by the FBI invoked by our current president 1 year ago as his first basis for the kidnapping of workers and students abducted off the streets or pulled from their cars. So this was the scene here in Seattle at the Kutsu House up at 10th and Alder on First Hill. Father arrested, taken away, Seattle police car, not seen again for nearly 2 years. Mr. Kutsu's sons write to the Department of Justice for his release without success. So their mother, in desperation, writes to First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. And we include this, her letter by Nao Akutsu, that was translated for the White House. And in part, it says, "Please excuse me, gracious one, for appealing to you directly for a special favor. My name is Akutsu. I am the wife of Kyonsei Akutsu. My husband is an upright man with no bad habits, such as smoking or drinking. We do not know what to do. The father is necessary for the education of the children. I appeal to you to send back the father of these American citizens and my honest husband as soon as possible. If you do this, I shall not trouble you again." And she talks about her husband's arrest. The U.S. attorney said an old acquaintance had reported that my husband was strongly pro-Japanese. He did not give the name. What a bad fellow Japanese he is to inform. What a dirty man he is. I wonder whether he wanted to incriminate us and inflict hardship on our family, or whether he was just trying to get money. My husband may have said something for his homeland, but it is beyond my belief that he, who always dearly loved America and vowed never to go back to Japan, could say the type of thing he is reported to have said. He has lived in America for over 35 years, and America is his second home. Besides, America is the country of his children. So this letter may have actually worked because her husband was released from the DOJ camp in Montana soon afterward. But the president caves into popular fear and issues an executive order authorizing the mass removal of all persons of Japanese ancestry from our homes on the West Coast. Two things are important here. One is that we as a community were denied due process. No individual hearings, no trials to determine individual threats. In fact, the Akutsu father was given more individual hearing than the mass of those who were forcibly removed. Second is we were denied our rights as citizens born in the U.S. When these exclusion orders were nailed to telephone poles up and down the West Coast, these people gathered around to read the fine print, and when you look at the fine print, it says this order, exclusion order number 18, applies to all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated from the above area, and prescribes an outline, which is the borders of Chinatown, basically. And Akutsu and others look around and read this, and they go, no, alien, I know what an alien is. That's my father. But what's a non-alien? Oh, they mean us. They mean American citizens. They won't come out and say it, but that's what it means. So in the anthology, what we get in a reading of the selections that run throughout the volume is the pervasive anger at the loss of our rights as birthright citizens. And I hammer that point because, as we saw last week at the Supreme Court, one of the first acts of our current president in his second term was an executive order that denies birthright citizenship to those of his choosing. We'll see how the court rules. Incidentally, these boundaries of exclusion zone number 18, the Washington Defense Command issued 108 of these exclusion zones, and 6 of them just for the city of Seattle. And I can't resist showing you exclusion zone number 17 for where we sit right now. From Green Lake down to Magnolia, Queen Anne, along the waterfront down to Seattle, down to downtown. And we are sitting right in the very tip there, if Fifth Avenue, Pike Street, and Jackson, between Jackson and Pike, is the Central Library. In fact, I realized that the boundary between 17 and Zone 57 is Fifth Avenue, right facing east behind you right here. That's the boundary. That's how precise the government's logistics were. So one of the few objections to this whole machinery and the lack of due process at the time comes in the written testimony in our volume of journalist James Omura, born in Bainbridge Island, that we include. And he has this pointed question that he poses to a congressional committee.
Has the Gestapo come to America? Have we not risen in righteous anger at guilty suspicion of the Jews? Then is it not in Congress that citizen Americans of Japanese descent should be similarly mistreated and persecuted?
That's from our film Conscience of the Constitution, which Tom so kindly mentioned. So once they got us all inside these camps, what our volume shows is that our volume traces the 3 government edicts that confuse and divide our community inside these camps. The Loyalty Oath, you may have heard about, the draft, and the Denaturalization Act. And first of all, the government did not give us a chance to offer an individual proof of loyalty before kicking us off the coast. It waited 1 year after forced removal and mass imprisonment to ask for a statement of loyalty via a form questionnaire. And it only asks because it wants to accept volunteers in the Army or to release young men and women to college or jobs in the East and Midwest. So the questionnaire asks, the last 2 questions are the most pertinent, if you're willing to serve in the Armed Forces of the United States, and whether you swear allegiance to the U.S. and forswear any and all allegiance to the Emperor of Japan. You know, nowadays a paper questionnaire seems so 20th century. What DHS would do now is simply search your social media and browser history to determine your thoughts and loyalties. But this is the 20th century. And in this case, a no answer to the last 2 questions triggers transfer. And by the way, no one knew the consequences of a yes or no answer on these questionnaires at the time. But the consequence was segregation, transfer to a high security camp at a camp called Tule Lake on the California-Oregon border. Tule Lake was the site of a revolt, of bloody beatings, of martial law, and creation of the Tule Lake Stockade, which was a prison within a prison. And a number of segregees in Tule Lake founded literary magazines through which they could pour out their feelings in Japanese. Decades later, these mimeograph journals were preserved and reproduced not in America, but in Tokyo in 1997. The Japanese in Japan were way ahead of us in recognizing the value of these writings. And I was immediately drawn to the volumes that say Tesaku right here, which means Iron Gate or Iron Stockade. In fact, Tesaku was founded in response to the creation of the Tule Lake Stockade. It was edited by 3 Kibei Nisei as a high-quality, curated literary magazine in response to the stockade. On the right is a fellow named Joji Nozawa, Los Angeles. He was 25 years old, just 25, when he wrote a remarkable short story called Father of Volunteers. So Floyd and I commissioned Professor Andrew Leong of UC Berkeley to translate this in one of the story for us. And let me read from the end of Father of Volunteers, in which Nozawa takes us behind these sad faces in commonly seen images like this of Gold Star parents venerated for the sacrifice of their sons in combat. We've seen these images, men and women putting on brave face for the public, but we never hear their voices in a language we can understand to know what's going on inside their heads, right? So in this short story, Mr. Saeki and his wife have been released to Detroit for work as housekeepers, okay? They have 3 sons. 2 volunteer for the Army and are killed in action. So they refuse to let their 3rd son go, but he insists, and he too is lost. A reporter asks Mr. Saeki how he feels about losing his only surviving child, and the next day his white employer is excited to show him the newspaper, and this is the story. Printed in the paper was an article about his 3 sons' deaths, accompanied by a portrait of Mr. Saeki. The article included the following quote: "When I think about how my 3 sons have died for America, I think of how content they are now in heaven. When I think of this, I do not feel sadness, but rather a far greater feeling of honorable happiness." These were the words that Mr. Saeki had said to the journalist the day before, but reading them now, He felt like he wanted to vomit. These words just turned back upon him as expressions of his own self-loathing. Why didn't he just bash his head in against the wall? He wanted to beat himself senseless. He looked at the picture of himself in the newspaper and saw a perfect specimen of village idiot. Like tongues of flame, a violent anger flickered, caught, and burst within him. Mr. Saeki did not care that his employer was standing next to him. He crushed the paper into a crumpled ball, slammed it down into the wastepaper basket in the corner, and then stomped on the basket, smashing it with all of his might. So when Andrew sent us this translation, I was just stunned at the emotional quality of this writing with the same anger and passion as a John Okada, author of Nono Boy. And we included it, of course. But it made me wonder, how much more is out there that we don't know about yet just because we don't read Japanese? That's what Andrew said too. This is Andrew here on the left, Andrew Leung, the translator. He too is very excited, and he got funding to hire a team to translate all 9 issues of Tesaku, and we hope to publish those translations in a few years. They're almost done now, but we're pleased to introduce these stories in the Penguin Anthology. Now, I mentioned song lyrics as literature, and Tom mentioned at the camp at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, 63 young men refused as a group to be drafted from inside a concentration camp until their rights are first restored and their families released from camp. And awaiting trial in the Cheyenne County Jail, 2 of them composed a jailhouse song in Japanese that the guards could not understand. This Song of Cheyenne is something that playwright Frank Chin and I found on this worn scrap of paper carried in the wallet of another resistor for 35 years. This is an example of the kind of scraps I've been carrying around with me for all this time. I reached the songwriter, and he confirmed the lyrics were set to music, but he couldn't remember the tune for the Song of Cheyenne. So Frank asked the actor Mako to recite them at a public event, and Mako took one look at it, and he immediately recognized the rhythm of the Hore Hore Bushi, a Hawaiian plantation work song. And the songwriter was, in fact, Hawaiian. So here's a 30-second clip of Mako singing the Song of Cheyenne.
Aloha Cheyenne, kago no naka, toto naname, sundeiru, ige wa hoboto, haemashita, dare ga ichiban nagai kara to.
So, song lyrics, too, are a part of the literature of incarceration. Finally, a few words about deportation. All during the war, members of Congress are looking for ways to strip American-born Nisei of their U.S. citizenship and deport everyone to Japan. Attorney General Francis Biddle keeps telling them, you can't do that under the 14th Amendment, which guarantees birthright citizenship. But he also suggests a way around the Constitution. And in July 1944, Congress adopts the Denaturalization Act, which for the first time enables a U.S. citizen to voluntarily renounce their citizenship during time of war. And the beauty of this idea, if you will, is that, why pass a law that will be overturned by the Supreme Court when you can get the angry, confused, frustrated people in camp to voluntarily surrender their citizenship? And it's in this environment that 7 of every 10 Nisei at Tule Lake, with only rumor and misinformation to guide them, voluntarily surrender their U.S. citizenship, acting under duress from the government, coercion from gangs allowed to run wild. As one character says, how convenient for the government to give us the chance to self-deport. And we walked right into the trap. One of them is a Nisei firebrand named Joe Kurihara from Hawaii. Kurihara is known for his part to incite what's known as the Manzanar Revolt. He blamed himself for the death of 2 young men who were shot and killed by military police in that revolt. And we include his poem, Mourning Their Loss, in The Martyrs of Camp Manzanar. We also include a vehement screed he wrote against the racism and oppression he endured in America and in camp that drove him to renounce and expatriate to Japan. And please pardon the language of the time, but it's called Japs they are, citizens or not. They've kicked and cussed and on us spat, calling us Japs, the stabbers in the back, saboteurs and spies, these damnable Japs. Throw them into camps and ship them back. In shameful words, they forced us out into a desert like a bunch of sheep. They stole our homes and blasted our rights. With merciless sweep, they broke us all. Yeah, 6 more stanzas like this. I'm skipping to the end. Goodbye, America, goodbye. Jap I was born, and as Jap I shall live. Proud as a cock to the world I crow. Jap I am, and as Jap I will die. So this is not a Japanese American literature we've seen before. Certainly not the greatest hits or the finest writing. I should stop here, but in the Q&A, you will want to know what I see as the connections between then and now. And so we published this anthology in the spring of 2024. In August 2024, I was shocked to turn on the TV for the nominating convention of a major political party and see delegates gleefully waving these like pre-printed signs, right? With a message of mass deportation now that harkens back to the cries of Congress in World War II. And just as at Tule Lake, Homeland Security today is pressuring immigrants to self-deport through the mass cancellation of student visas and through threatening TV ads like this, goading immigrants to leave on their own with cash incentives of $3,000 to $5,000. The use of jetliners for mass deportation is neatly captured in this artwork for a talk I gave 1 year ago, a 21st century jetliner ready to forcibly remove Jim Okutsu and his family from 1942 to a place that he's never lived before. So 1 year ago, the tactic was, for mass deportation, was to offshore and outsource immigrant detention to places the U.S. already owns, like Guantanamo, Cuba. Then it evolved to flying them to an industrialized prison in El Salvador. I don't have the photograph here, but you've seen the picture of the industrialized prisons in El Salvador with men being frog marched with their heads shaved in unlit prisons. The process is changing yet again because in the big budget bill of last summer, Congress gave Homeland Security $38 billion to massively scale up its capacity by leasing or buying up vacant warehouses near cities to bring the camps indoors where no one can see what's going on inside. So we're not repeating the wartime World War II iconography of barbed wire machine guns. These are warehouses. We've heard the acting director of ICE famously quoted as saying he wants a deportation system that works as efficiently as Amazon Prime, only for human beings. This, by the way, is an actual White House photo showing the president in the red hat there, inspecting this facility in Dade County, Florida, built by Ron DeSantis. You may remember your reaction upon hearing his popular nickname of Alligator Alcatraz. These are caged bunkhouses built inside huge industrial warehouses. This is the floor plan for just one floor. Each black dot is a person. This is a map updated just last month showing places where DHS is buying warehouses across America. The blue dots are proposed sites. The black dots are where deals are pending or complete. The red dots are where city councils have denied use of a location. The other poll was go for broke, which was Hawaiian pidgin for go all out, give 110%. It was the motto, the battle cry of the famed 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and you say soldiers. So go for broke or shikata ganai, neither of which really rang true for me as a child of the 60s growing up in the Bay Area of California. When I learned about the resistance to incarceration with the Harbotton Fair Play Committee, Jim Okutsu here in Seattle, Mitsuya Endo of Sacramento in the graphic novel, lending her name to a habeas corpus case, or Hiroshi Kashiwagi at Tule Lake refusing to sign the loyalty questionnaire. Those are the stories I gravitated towards. Stories of resistance to incarceration, and again, not celebrating what I call the victim narrative or the victimization narrative, but the stories in the graphic novel and the anthology of pushing back against the government, because it was the government that is the inciting action here. It's not Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was the spark, but the inciting incident for our experience was President Roosevelt's executive order That is what just destroyed our community. It changed our community. So pushing back, and I think that this has prepared me for all the things that are happening today, to talk, to frame those in perspective as well. Boy, oh boy, we have a lot ahead of us.
Yeah. So another comment. You want to go up here? And while you're doing this, I just want to finish the story of my dad. But after we started collecting stories, my dad became the biggest fan of Dan Show, and really getting all the diverse stories. He thought that was a really powerful thing. But go ahead.
I believe the original question was, what can we do?
Yeah.
This is so important, especially when I heard this woman say that this is, it was in the past. We can't let it be in the past. It's happening right now at the Smithsonian's, where this administration is trying to sanitize and erase the histories, good or bad. We can't do this. Collectively, this is so important. Individually, I've read one of those books. Well, I need to read another one now, and then the next one. So individually, we can educate ourselves. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, also with my classmates were also black, so I learned a lot about slavery and the Holocaust. We need to keep all of that alive, at least with a determined effort these next 2 or 3 years. And then when this is over, what we're seeing out there, don't forget it. Don't say it's in the past. And I'm so grateful to what you two are doing by telling us, making that connection. It's so important right now. And I feel grateful that I can learn a little bit more. So what can we do? This. Maybe it's 100 today, maybe it's 125 next month, someplace else. So thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So I'm hearing, share it more widely. Protest when you can. Remember your culture. Some of the things. Yeah, there's some more up here. Oh, there's one over here. So we'll go over to the right here. Oh, yeah, turn your mic on.
There are groups in Seattle that are looking for volunteers. Some of them are having volunteers sit in the courtrooms, immigration courts, and just monitor what's going on. There are other groups that are looking for people to help immigrants write documents saying if they get exported and they have children living here, who do they want to be caring for their children? I don't know what the ACLU, they may have groups as well. So that's one thing we can do. And then kind of on a different note, when I am buying presents for friends who are having children or nieces and nephews who are having children, I always get books that have children of color in the books, because I think it's important for these children, even for babies, to see children who have different color of skin than they do. So, and that's been kind of fun for me to do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lee Micklin, and I'm a semi-retired teacher, librarian in Seattle Public Schools. Most recently from Cleveland High School, where I taught with Claire Abe,
Oh
Frank's
my gosh,
daughter.
thank you so much, my daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, she's
I was a
wonderful.
counselor at Cleveland. Hey,
We
Lee.
were both at Cleveland. And I also was a language arts teacher at Nathan Hale with Nikki. And I wanted to share our experiences. We used Densho as a text. We worked with Elaine Wetterauer, and
She was my teacher.
at Franklin. Yeah, and so she introduced Densho to us when it was on CD drives down at Wing Luke, and we went down there and we familiarized ourselves with it, and we taught when the emperor was divine, and we used all the stories. We had curriculum where the students would choose use it as kind of a palette where they could choose from which stories from Densho and what themes they wanted to write their papers about. So it was a gift that keeps on giving. It really affected me. Densho did, and it's something that is just amazing, wonderful. I'm sort of going to jump around. Next thing I want to say is Nikki and I were at my mom with my mom tonight. My mom was 13 years old when she recalls she was talking to us about this tonight. She's 93 now. A Japanese grocery store on 24th Avenue in Montlake closed. Some friends of hers she wasn't at Garfield then, I don't think, but some friends of hers, maybe it was Meanie, was it Meanie? Left. And now she's kind of haunted by it. Like she didn't understand then what was really going on. And she's kind of haunted by it. She talked about.
She should have done something. She should have known more and done something.
Yeah, and she was 13, but still, she said, and a friend came back and something.
And they never talked about it.
And they didn't talk about it, but she got a tea set back. Somebody gave her a tea set back. So I guess that's kind of random, but I guess what I also wanted to say was from studying Densho and more, there's some parallels between, we're Jewish, and of course, many times I think, just like you think, we didn't do anything when the Japanese Americans were being incarcerated, and oftentimes, I think, well, if it were the Holocaust, what were the neighbors doing then? And so now, of course, it puts a big burden on us that should be there. What are we doing? But I also wanted to say that there's a parallel between Japanese American people and Jewish American people that just really strikes me, because right now it can be very hard. It's not easy to be, okay, I might alienate somebody by saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's not easy to be proud of what Israel is doing. And Jewish people feel it, and other Jewish people say, it's self-defense, whatever. But so I feel like we're being villainized. We can be villainized in the same way that Japanese American people were villainized by having that parallel with the country of Japan at the same time as the war. We have a parallel, with Israel. And so I feel that I'm ending on a big question mark. Maybe I'm ending on a oy vey.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I want to make a comment, and then let Frank comment on what you're saying. And that's, sort of, some of the things you said in terms of, I interviewed, people of World War II era, and you do hear a lot of, if only I had known what was happening, I would have done something. And that's why this quote is so powerful to me, that, we sort of know what's happening today. And in some ways, that tells us what we would have done during World War II. And that's that, and I sense it from you, I should know better, right? I know this. What should I do? And you agonize about that. And in some ways, I'm searching for the answers right now. And that's why I want to hear, the audience and Frank talk about this. Just what do we do with this knowledge? And Frank, do you have any?
All I can do is write about it, talk about it, and share it with my network. So you really do what you can. You talk to your book club, you talk to your friends at church, you talk to your sewing groups, whatever, your neighbors. Just talk. You only do what you can within whatever social network you have, and that's all you can do.
Yeah, no, and it is such a personal sort of decision. That you showed that one photograph of the Fort Sill protest, and you mentioned, I was there. It was kind of a turning point for me in 2019 when the first the first term of Trump, they were creating a detention facility for children at a place called Fort Sill, which was one of the internment camps for the Issei. And I had interviewed a gentleman in Hawaii whose father was shot and killed at Fort Sill. And and the heaviness, I mean, having that story and the devastation of that family, what happened, you know, this man who was killed, he was the father of like 10 or 11 children, and he was the breadwinner. And when he was taken away, he was so worried about his family, he essentially kind of went crazy. And even though he was in Oklahoma, he started climbing the fence so he could try to get back home to help his family. And there were two fences, and he went over one, and still there was this other fence. A guard just went up there and shot him in the head. And so I heard the story. And so when I heard about Fort Sill being, again, a children's, a detention facility for children, at some point it's kind of like, you know, as kind of the executive director of Densho, working with teachers, you know, you're kind of trained to kind of try to be objective. You want to, you know, teach, you want to learn, you want to be kind of seen as this trusted source. But when you gain this knowledge, at what point do you say things are going too far? When do you take another step? And again, that's a very personal decision that we all have to make.
And I really admire the fact, Tom, that you stuck your neck out and you actually went to Fort Sill and put your body on the line there, despite your prominent role in the community as a.
Yeah, I was just following Satsuki. Satsuki says, "So Tom, we might get arrested here." I said, "Oh, okay, yeah. let's go for it."
Right. So for those who don't know, densho.org is the website that we're talking about here. And Densho, we're lucky here in Seattle to have. It's a world-class organization, a world-class source of information about the camps and incarceration, with an encyclopedia online that is like the Wikipedia of Japanese American incarceration. It's just brilliant. And visual histories, all these oral histories have been recorded as videos, and ABCs of incarceration and terminology broken down, proper terminology to use. So it's all there, and it's all free. And Tom did it all. Tom started it all.
So thank you for the plug.
Yes.
Do we have another, someone in the audience want to say
I
something?
have one here, and then looks like we have one there too. Okay, so we'll go 1, 2, 3. Sound okay? So I'm going to read this on behalf of the patron at their request. So it says, this patron volunteers to accompany people to their immigration court hearings with Jewish Coalition for Immigrant Justice so that people know that they aren't alone. These are things that people can do and are doing now. This patron donates to Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and canceling one of their streaming subscriptions and directing monthly payments to NWIRP instead. And also recommending that people donate to La Resistencia, that they have a fund that directly supports people incarcerated in the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. And then also this patron recommends that you contact your state legislators and tell them to shut down the detention center in Tacoma. So
Thank you
that's
for
from
that.
this
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Mikiko Long, and I was invited here by my sister, Lisa Long, and I'm not usually a good speaker or anything, so I might tear up a little bit here, but I do try to show up to these kinds of events because I do think they're very important, like this gentleman over here said. It's just, I think for me, I try not to get depressed about it all and try to, move forward and try to, show up where I can and speak to my friends and family members about my own experience with repression. We come from a family that's connected to the bombing of Hiroshima. So my grandparents were victims, and my whole mother's family were victims of the bombing of Hiroshima. And I'm here with my older sister Masako and my younger sister Lisa. And it took them such a long time to be able to even speak on their experience being victims of the bombing in Hiroshima. And finally, when my mother's sisters were much older and we developed a much stronger relationship with our family members, where they finally able to tell us their own experience of what they went through on that day and there afterwards. And luckily, my grandparents survived that bombing to where they were able to have my mother as their last child, and then that's the only reason why we're here today. So part of it is that it is very important for us to get out there and get educated on these topics and realize how connected all this is. And in doing that, sometimes it becomes so overwhelming that I just feel like I am affected by that, and I do get depressed about where we're at today, because I feel like we should be making more progress as a society. And I think about how the Native Americans were affected and how they're still affected today and how they're pushed into their lands. And I think about the Hopi people who, tried to resist and keep their culture alive. And I try to think about how everything is connected, and hopefully, we can break through this and move on as a people and get stronger and think about how all oppression is connected and stand up for each other's rights.
No, thank you so much.
Do you want to talk thank you very much. Do you want to talk about the book a little bit before we close?
So, well, we have one more. Can we do one more? We promise this one.
You can pass. Go ahead. What you have to say is more important.
Okay. So, is there anything in particular? I mean, I have questions and comments about.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, I thought it would be interesting to, again, I mentioned how much I've been a student of Japanese American history. And one of the things that struck me both in the book and then in your presentation was the, I mean, you kind of almost like a discovery, but this whole body of work in Japanese. And why that I think is so important. On Saturday, I did a program here, and I showed a clip from an Issei, Mutsuhoma, who was an Issei, and she shared this sort of adult conversation with the guard about the dehumanizing aspects of the war. And essentially the guard says, Mutsu, are you a human being? I mean, we were taught to, that you were supposed to be more like gorillas, but you're not. And so Mutsu, as an adult, had these kind of conversations. So the stories, the conversations happening by the adults, the older ones, were very different than their children. And that's what struck me about the Tesaku kind of excerpt that you were talking about. And I just wanted to get your sense in terms of how large is that body? What were you finding, and what are you hoping for?
Well, like I say, I mean, there are literary magazines in all 10 camps that have not been examined with any systematic way. So, and also the Tesaku editors went on to have careers after the war ended. So in the Rafu Shimpo newspaper in Los Angeles, Joji Nozawa continued to be English editor of the writers. He cultivated the same group of writers in the pages of the Rafu Shimpo in L.A. And I think there's another, and they also wrote stories about camp, memoirs about camp, stories. And I think there's just another body of work out there that is left yet to be discovered of the Issei writing about the reflections of the war and incarceration that just happened.
And so, Frank, I'm sorry, it's 8:10,
Yes.
and that's kind of our, a little more time? Okay.
I do want to talk about John Okada a little bit.
Okay.
That because I see that. By the way, Mom's Books. He's here in Seattle. Mom's Books. Sokadan is the owner. It's the only the first Asian American bookstore in Seattle, and the only one. And he has all of our books here. And I say he has the John Okada book here. I was privileged to be guest curator for a program here at the library 3 years ago on the 100th birthday of John Okada here in Seattle, the Okada Centennial. And, as I said, to me, his novel, No Boy, his one novel, is set here in Seattle and is kind of a Seattle noir, a very downbeat story of a Nisei draft resistor like Jimakutsu. In fact, it's based on Jimakutsu. And his return to Seattle and being spat upon by the Nisei veterans for being a troublemaker, a dissenter, a no-no boy. So I think that one project I'm moving on to next is a stage adaptation of No-No Boy. And we're working with the Seattle rep on several script revisions. And so that will be hopefully a project that we see happening. These things take time. So we're talking about 27, 28 if things line up and the script is developed in time. So there's just, it's an opportunity to continue this work and bring it to not just a book audience, but a theater audience, a different audience here in Seattle to continue digging into all the dirty laundry that your father, all the terrible stories of conflict and division in the Japanese American community. I'm just going to spill them out on stage. And, yeah.
Well, and No Boy, I mean, the power of literature. Earlier there was a comment about a teacher, Elaine Wetterauer, who taught at Franklin High School. So she was my language arts teacher, and she was born at Tule Lake, and she realized I didn't know much about what happened to the Japanese American community. So I remember as a junior at Franklin High School, she gave me the book No Boy,
Oh, wow.
and said, "Tom, you need to read this
Yeah.
and do a report." That changed my whole life. I mean, in many ways, when I think of the impact of literature, because it wasn't just a telling of what happened in camp. There was this angry voice that resonated with me, because this was in the 70s, the kind of early 70s, and it was after the Vietnam War and everything, and I couldn't understand. And I bring my dad back into it. We'd have arguments about the military, and my dad's a World War II vet, and I say, "So Dad, why did you fight and not resist?" And I said this all after reading No Boy, and it was a really revealing conversation. But that's the power of literature in opening up, especially these hard issues. And so again, I want to acknowledge you and the work. A play on No Boy, a new play on No Boy would be wonderful. And I'm going to actually close this so that people can, if they have more questions, they can come up to you. But I do just want to I mentioned my dad several times. I just want to plug an event that's happening this Saturday. That there is another series of stories, Japanese American community, some around the veterans. And on Saturday at Meany Hall, University of Washington, they're doing a show called Defining Courage, and they're acknowledging my 99-year-old father, who will be on stage as a World War II vet. And he's actually, we think, the last standing World War II vet, Japanese American, in the Seattle area. And so I just wanted to mention that. It's at 6 o'clock, Meany Hall. If you're interested, you can ask me more questions. But with that, Frank, I just want to thank you so much for not only tonight, but your work. I hope you really get how much I admire your work and what you've done. So again, a big round of applause for Frank Abe.